Ian,
Yes.
we love little Marty Scorsese. There was a hubbub of him saying that Marvel movies, hullabaloo about him about a month ago already, saying that Marvel movies to him isn't cinema. And then everyone went after him for saying that. People saying, how dare you, Martin Scorsese, you're jealous of the success of Marvel movies, which to me is the silliest thing you could say. But at the time, he was trying to, defend what he saw as more, I was to say risk-taking when it came to movie making and more auteur-style movie making versus what he saw as corporate movies taking over, movie theaters, which is what is happening with these releases. Big tentpole releases now are like 80% of movies, it seems like nowadays. But back in the day, there was a more even split of these things. So he now has penned an op-ed piece saying, I said Marvel movies aren't cinema. Let me explain. Cinema is an art form that brings you the unexpected. In superhero movies, nothing is at risk, a director says. And he goes into a well-written op-ed piece in the New York Times explaining that franchise films are made by people of considerable talent and artistry. You can see it on the screen. The fact that the films themselves don't interest me is a matter of personal taste and temperament. I know that if I were younger, if I'd come of age at a later time, I might have been excited by these pictures and maybe even want to make one myself. But I grew up when I did, and I developed a sense of movies, of what they were and what they could be. That was as far from the Marvel Universe as we on Earth are from Alpha Centauri. He goes on to say just about, let's see, to him, filmmaking was about confronting the unexpected on the screen and in the life it dramatized and interpreted, and enlarging the sense of what was possible in the art form. For us, it was an art form. There was some debate about that at the time, so we stood up for cinema as an equal to literature or music or dance, and we came to understand that the art could be found in many different places and in just as many forms. They talked about Alfred Hitchcock's films being like their version of Marvel movies at the time. There were big events you went to.
He conceded that some things were samey, but he also said, he also, expressed why he felt like they were different. And in some ways, I do think some of it is simply a generational gap thing. But I think a lot of people who reacted against his initial statement so poorly, forget to realize is he's not saying that you can't like superhero stories. This isn't so much your superhero stories are dumb. It's these are your mass-produced, highly commercial corporate superhero stories, and I'm coming from the angle of the little guy. Like, I know it's weird to think about it that way because Scorsese hasn't exactly been, a little guy in a while. And there was a time where superhero movies, in all of our memory, were these small projects that people didn't think were ever going to amount to anything.
They were garbage movies that would come and go. You see one every 3 years come out.
And in just a decade, that's changed. So I think a lot of people, this is a great article. If people sit down and read it, anyone who is not being willfully ignorant, I think, is going to read this article and go, I get it. I understand. Because it's not so much an insult or a commentary on superhero movies themselves, but on mass-produced corporate commercial movies that have sort of taken over the theaters. And that's what superhero movies have become. And I like a lot of superhero movies, but Pat and I were talking about it a little bit before, and I'll bring it up again. And I said this the minute I left the theater after seeing Infinity War. There was no emotional investment. I remember reading online, people getting all sad, people doing the vanishing memes, when Thanos snaps his finger and people disappear.
People crying in the theater when I'm looking around like, what?
So hollow because because of how commercial these movies are, because of how these stories work, you understand that these people are coming back. You know that person, it's an immediate...
Black Panther's coming back because they're doing a sequel.
Because they just hired him.
Spider-Man's coming back because they're already filming the next one.
Because he's already been in one. From contracts, from the big money that it takes now to make these
It's a machine.
Over the course of a decade, it's changed so much that it is a machine. You know that these people are coming back. They're not going to hire someone for one movie and then kill them, and then that's it. They're coming back. There was no emotional investment in that movie. And I didn't like it.
It was still a good movie, I thought.
It was fine.
Yeah,
it was.
I thought it was still good.
It was, but it was just, it was not. There was no emotion, and the whole rending of garments afterwards. It's like, you guys are. I mean, I get that you're supposed to feel this way, but it's impossible to feel this way when everything outside of the actual movie itself is telling you, "Don't worry, you don't need to feel this
These
way."
movies are made in boardrooms. That's what Scorsese is trying to say. When Scorsese was on the rise, people like him and Coppola and Spielberg and Lucas, they were one man bands piecing together this stuff, going against the corporate system of Hollywood. They were the guys rebelling against that, and in doing so,
it was an artist's vision, not a boardroom's vision.
And in doing so, they created stuff you hadn't seen before in the 70s. The 70s was a renaissance of movies. At the things like Bonnie and Clyde. Even you want to say Jaws, blockbusters didn't exist before Spielberg did Jaws, really.
Sure.
So that was his vision. Now you can say blockbusters bad, but they were doing things that didn't exist at the time. Star Wars was revolutionary.
I'm not going to sit here and say that none of these folks have ever put out a bad movie, because they certainly have. I don't like a lot.
But they were trying to do something different at the time in a system that didn't exist for them.
His argument makes sense. You read it, and it's a valid argument. And you know, I didn't know about Zombieland 2 until like a month before it came out. Pat and I are sitting here, you know, in the intro talking about a zombie movie with Bill Murray that I heard whispers of, but never actually knew it came out.
It came out a Bill Murray with Tilda Swinton and Adam Driver zombie movie came out in June. And I guarantee you, half the people listening to this don't even know about that. A smaller, more, you want to say indie style budgeted movie came out through Focus Features, and no one saw it or heard about it.
I saw a preview for a movie that I actually really want to see called Knives Out that I didn't know about until then. And
I've actually heard about.
And now it comes out. It comes out in less than a month. So it's like, I love superhero movies. I go see most of them, not all of them, but most of them. And they've taken over the theater in such a way that I'm not a movie guy, and you can say, well, do your homework. You can say, do your homework, and you know about these movies. But there was a time where I could go to the movies casually like I do now and still be relatively kept abreast of what's coming out on the horizon. Sure. Now I don't think you can do that, because there's so much...
The smaller...
There's so many... And it's not just superheroes, but all these bigger movies are coming out. They're being pushed.
It seems
over
like
everything else.
Seems like what gets the full sort of like backing of... It's really the movie theaters, because they wanted people to come in what makes money. So superhero movies, big blockbuster action movies, and horror movies to me seem to be what you know about 6 months ahead of time and what you're geared to see in the movie theater. But like smaller dramas, smaller thrillers, things like that, biopics, you don't hear about. So when I'm on the plane, Ian, because I do this traveling, you go through the releases, and I'm looking at movies that are less than a year old that I didn't know existed before. Sure. That I never saw. So a movie like Stan and Ollie comes out, a biographical comedy drama of the legendary Laurel and Hardy, comedy act from the 20s and 30s and 40s. That's a movie I probably would have went to see in the theaters had I known it existed.
Sure.
I saw it on the plane, and it was outstanding. Another one I just caught, a 2018 war film starring Paul Rudd, not a small actor anymore, called The Catcher Was a Spy, based on a true story of a Major League Baseball player that goes and tries to recruit a German scientist in World War II. I had no idea that was a thing. Like, no idea. And if that was a movie that was advertised based upon the fact that even this is Paul Rudd and it's a story, I think people would have saw it. So that comes out, Ian, and gets a box office of less than $1 million because it doesn't even get a chance to be in the movie theater. So when that happens, Ian, guess what? Less of those movies are made. And that's what Scorsese is trying to say. There'll be less risk-taking when it comes to movies. And that's not even, to me, a World War II movie with Paul Rudd, to me, isn't even a risk. That should have got a wide release.
Right.
And people should have seen that movie. So. And instead, it makes no money. They don't make them anymore.
And like I said, I do admit that I don't pay attention to movies very much. Maybe if I was like, you know what, let me look into some of these movies that are coming out. I'd like to go see a movie. I'd like to see a couple movies this month with Bonnie. I can look at what's happening. I might know about this more, but I definitely do feel like the media was better at giving you a greater overall picture of what was being released or what was upcoming.
Yeah.
Now, like I said, it's I go to a movie and I might catch I catch a preview out of nowhere. But that Knives Out movie looks great. I like.
Oh, that's good. I think that's a great cast. So I think that's going to be
that does have an insane.
But that's now more the exception now, where it's just a thriller movie with an eclectic cast. You know that let's say Ryan Johnson's directing. Like, it's harder and harder to get people in the theaters to see that sort of stuff.
Right, and that's
or being conditioned not to see that stuff.
I'm looking at this movie and I'm like, this should be
a bigger
fantastic, and this should be great based on, you know, the director, the cast.
Chris Evans in it, Daniel Craig.
But yeah, I don't know. Maybe mystery movies aren't in right now. But, yeah, it looked good. Yeah,
that's all Mr. Scorsese is trying to say there. He's not saying you can't enjoy the movies, or he's just saying that they're. And the examples we gave, like the firings of like Edgar Wright off the Ant-Man movie, because it wasn't keeping
still. Well, and now I read this, and that comes back to kill me, because if there is one Marvel movie I could see, I would have been there day one, and I've been there day one for a lot. But I love Edgar Wright, and I would have loved to have seen what he would have done with that, and I'm sure it would have been very different. The problem is like I look at you look at Edgar Wright and his humor, and you look at I almost wonder if that Ant-Man movie was being made now, if he would have a better chance of being able to make it, or less.
The Marvel movies have become more and more cookie cutter as I've gone along.
Yeah,
they just have. I mean, say what you will about the Incredible Hulk movie. Probably the original vision of that wasn't Marvel Studios, but still, that would have been probably a way different movie. That longer cut we're never going to see, and so things like that happen. Where Scorsese had a line where he said the Marvel movies are remakes; they're not really sequels; they're remakes of just one another, and he's right. Because you're getting the same characters, you're getting similar, you know, villain situations, and the plots are very similar.
But one thing I've always said about them too, that I think is to a degree, it's a compliment when they're done well, is comic book movies have very much emulated
comic books,
what they are supposed to be. Yeah, they have emulated the medium. Nothing really matters for more than that moment. I don't feel like that they're meant to be gone back to. That's always been a complaint of mine, is even like I've never felt the need to really go back and watch any of them, and that's fine. But they are, I think, in a way, a very different thing than movies. You go and you see them in movie theaters, but it's just slices of life constantly. It's just the same. It's the characters and the little stories, and they keep going. And yes, you tell the same
book.
It's a comic book.
You throw it out when you're done. That's why people threw them out. They were worthless. I read it this month. Get rid of it. It's done. Because it doesn't matter. I really want to see life or history of cinema 50 years from now to see. Out of all these Marvel movies, there might be a few that go back and are rewatched by people. You think people are going to go back and rewatch Ant-Man and the Wasp or Iron Man 2 or Thor: The Dark World in 20 years? No one's going to watch those movies anymore.
No, they were passable issues on a way to a greater event. Yes. I mean, that's what they were.
People will watch like maybe the top 10 or 10% of these Marvel movies. They'll see, oh, Guardians of the Galaxy did something different. Civil War tried to do something different. Or, of course, Winter Soldier did. I was
going to say, Guardians of the Galaxy, Winter Soldier.
Maybe Civil War I thought was interesting.
Thor 3 of all
Thor 3 is out there and wacky.
Of all the Thor movies, you know, that one. There are ones that people will go back to. There are good movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and even the worst ones I don't really regret watching because they were fun at the moment. But you're
not going to rewatch them,
right? I don't think of them necessarily the same way as
I never said to myself, "Oh my God, Iron Man 2 is on TV. I'm gonna miss out." I couldn't even tell you what happens in Iron Man 2 anymore. I can't tell you.
Iron Man 2 is that movie that people watch because they feel they need to complete it. But if this was not. If there was not a big cinematic universe, no one would be going back to watch Iron Man 2. They're only watching it because it's part of a larger. It's a smaller piece and part of a larger picture.
Yeah, that's the whole point there. Is that the up and rising auteur filmmaker is going to be tough to get movies made like they did 30, 40 years ago. So if I was a director, I'd be troubled. I have to be on Scorsese's side because, like, what if I want to do my movie that could be amazing? I'll never get to make it. That's what he's saying here. The firing of both standalone Star Wars movies, they fired the directors off both of them. Well, with Rogue One, they didn't say they fired him, but they basically fired him and reshot half the movie. On the Solo movie, they fired the two directors and got Ron Howard because it wasn't keeping in line with what Disney wanted to do.
And it's odd. I mean, I'm just one viewer, but like getting rid of, say, Edgar Wright on Ant-Man meant that I didn't watch Ant-Man until like a year after it came out.
And it's like it's an okay movie, but it would have been probably somewhat better with
Rogue One. I would have seen in theaters but I still haven't seen it yet. I know a lot of Gareth Edwards like shots are still in there, but I know they changed it drastically. So my entire desire to see the movie was out the fucking window.
Because you want to see what the original auteur, the original vision of what that was going to be.
Yeah.
Which could have been a little risky, but at least it would have been something different.
Right.
But it maybe would have made only $20 million left. So the bean counters say, oh, no. We have it, market tested what we want. And that's what also he was saying. That's all he's saying. So it's funny people are jumping down Scorsese's throat when he's sticking up for someone trying to...
Yeah, if you actually read what he's saying and you don't take everything so personally, you realize that it's not so much an attack on comic books. I think a lot of people read it and wanted to think that, oh, it's comic books are for kids. No, that's not what he's saying at all. He's actually talking about the movie-making system.
Yes. He's standing up for the little guy. A little tiny, cute Martin Scorsese. All right, moving on.